Okay, we're going to start this first episode, or this first video on the historical problems with the Quran by beginning, as I do there at KT. You're going to see I'm going to look at 4 claims that all Muslims make about their revelation. 4 claims that all Muslims everywhere, except for the liberals, certainly the nominal and the conservatives, make this claim. And then I'm going to ask if we make the same claim about the Bible, and you'll see we're talking about 2 different planes. We're not talking about 2 different views, presuppositions of revelation. But then I'm going to move right into what modern Muslim scholars are saying about their Quran. Some of the well-known modern Muslim scholars, what do they say about their Quran? And then I'm going to go back to the 9th and 10th century and look and see what the earliest Muslim scholars said about their Quran. And you're going to see there's a huge disconnect. So, without further ado, let's get right into it.
Well, terrific. Good to be back with you again. This topic tonight is one of my favorite topics. And the reason why is because it is so pivotal. Now, last night, we pretty much confronted the man, Muhammad. Tonight, we're going to confront the book. Last night, remember at the very beginning, I mentioned that in order to understand Islam, you really need to really understand 2 things. The 2 things that hold up Islam is one book, the Quran, and one man, Muhammad. Conversely, the same thing exists for us as Christians. Remember I said that last night, that for us to understand who we are, we also follow a book modeled by a man, but not the same book, not the same man. Ours is the Bible, the man is Jesus Christ. Now, since these are the foundations for both faiths, and since we understand our book better than anybody else, we can therefore understand why the Quran is so powerful for Islam, why it's so foundational, and why and where it gets its authority from. You walk out these doors and you talk to almost anybody else, and they will not understand that as much as you do. And that's why we're focusing on these 2 areas. Last night we did a historical survey looking at the emergence of Islam. We asked an awful lot of questions concerning not only the fact that there's just nothing there for us to look at, but that when it finally is written down, it's written down so late, 200 to 300 years later. Not from the 7th century when it should have been written down. It was being written down in the 9th and 10th century. Then we looked and asked, well, what is and why do you think this happened? And we then found out that had an awful lot to do with politics. It had nothing at all to do with theology, and it certainly had nothing to do with a man named Muhammad. And that was very clear that Islam really did not come from Muhammad, nor did the book, the Quran, come from Muhammad. And we're going to see that today. But we need to come to those conclusions, and we've got to do that by walking through and asking, how is it and where are we going to find this book? Now let's look at their claims. I'm going to start with the claims the Muslims make, like I did last night. And there really are 4 claims. These are the 4 claims that you can learn, memorize, just memorize those blue words. Number 1, that the Quran has always been. It is uncreated. It is the uncreated book that exists on tablets that exist in heaven. That's internal to the Quran itself. In chapter 85, verse 22, you have that claim. So it's uncreated. Therefore, it has no human intervention. Number 2, that the references or those surahs that came from those tablets were sent down piecemeal by the angel Gabriel to a man named Muhammad over a 22-year period from 610 to 632. Uncreated, sent down. Number 3, that the Quran was not completed during Muhammad's lifetime. There was no Quran when Muhammad died, according to Islamic tradition, according to the Muslims. It was not in any codex, in any codice form. It was not written down in one manuscript. It was memorized by many of the companions of Muhammad. It was certainly written, parts of it were written on stones and bones and leaves, but had not yet been written down in a book form like I have here. And then number 4, that when it was finally written down at the time of Uthman, 652, the third caliph, that book that was written by him is exactly the same that I have in my hand today. This is known as the Hafs text. This is the canonical text. This is the text we're looking at, not the English part, the Arabic part. Now, if you're going to get a Quran, try to get one like this, one that has both Arabic and English, because much of what I'm going to say tonight and much of what I say up on the internet at Fander Films, I will be quoting verse after verse after verse. Most of the Muslims that you meet have not read those verses. The vast majority of Muslims do not read the Quran like you read the Bible. And the reason is very simple. Muslims only read the Quran to memorize it, to receive barakah, that's to receive blessing that's recorded by an angel sitting on their right shoulder, given to them when they were born. Another angel that sits on this shoulder records their bad deeds. It's very much like a bank account, credit and debit, credit and debit. So to retain that, or to get that credit, you have got to read the Quran, and you have to read it in Arabic. Now, only 15% of all Muslims worldwide speak Arabic. 85% do not know Arabic. And the vast majority of Muslims in this country do not know Arabic. So they're not going to know much of what I'm going to say tonight, and they're not going to know much of what you're going to claim, and not many of the references that you go to, they will have never heard. So keep a Quran with you. More than likely, almost every Muslim you will speak will not have a Quran with them. Isn't that so, Sarah? When we go to Speaker's Corner, how many Muslims have Qurans in their hands? Zilch. They all have Bibles in their hands, God bless them, and they have all these little post-it notes all the way through with seeming contradictions and seeming errors, seeming what they call scientific problems, but there is no one that has a Quran in their hands because they don't use the Quran to understand it. They don't use it to read it and assimilate it and then to apply it to their lives unless they're radical Muslims over here on the right. The vast majority of Muslims are not radicals. They're usually nominal or liberal. So for that reason, be aware of the fact that much of the material that you're going to learn, not just tonight, but also up on the internet, much of this material you will know, they won't. Let's then get back to this question. So if those are the 4 claims, that the Quran is eternal, that it was sent down to a man named Muhammad over a 22-year period, that it was codified and finalized, canonized there in 652 AD during the reign of the third caliph Uthman, and that it has never changed, can you see that's quite a mouthful right there, those 4. Would we ever say that about our Bible? Absolutely not, and please don't do that. We do not believe our Bible is uncreated. We know the Bible was created. We know who wrote it. We know when they wrote it. We put their names to many of the books that they wrote. It was written by men, inspired by God, but not written by God, and certainly not eternal. So don't make that claim about the Bible. Secondly, our Bible was not sent down. We don't know of any angel that brought portions of it over a 22-year period to anybody. Every one of the books was written by different men. 33 different men in 3 different continents over 1,500 years. And that's why we would never make these 2 first claims. Thirdly, we would make the claim that it was complete at one time. But we don't have any of the original manuscripts, so therefore we would not assume today that we could go back to those complete manuscripts, because for one very simple reason, they were written on papyrus, those interlocking leaves. And as you well know, papyrus disintegrates within 100 years. None of the manuscripts we're going to look at today by the Muslims, or the Qur'anic manuscripts, are written on papyrus. They're all written on parchment or vellum. That means animal skin. 2 completely different modes of writing. Ours are written on papyrus. It's not that they didn't have vellum in the 1st century. It was very expensive to use vellum, to use animal skin. And Christianity was birthed in poverty. And for the first 300 years remained in poverty until Constantine then, as the emperor, converted to Christianity and made it the state religion. So don't expect that we're talking about the same things with the Bible. We do not make these claims. We do not have the originals. Changes? Yes, we would admit that there have been many changes in the Bible. We even inform the reader about them. So when you open up Mark chapter 16, verse 9 to 20, At least in my Bible, there's a line warning the readers that these verses are not found in the earliest Greek manuscripts. John chapter 7, verse 53 to John chapter 8, verse 11, the story of the woman caught in adultery. These verses are not found in the earliest Greek manuscripts. 1 John chapter 5, verse 7, we warn the readers that these aren't even found in the later manuscripts. These were introduced possibly in the 15th century, just that one verse. So we are very open, we are very transparent. We would say the Bible has been changed, but the reason why we still keep those verses in there is because we know that they do not introduce any new doctrine that's not found elsewhere. Okay, so be careful. Don't make these 4 claims about the Bible. Please don't. Thank God we don't make these 4 claims. But the Muslims do. And that's why we need to investigate that. Now tonight, I cannot critique uncreatedness or eternality. I cannot set down because I'm not in the 7th century and I'm not up in heaven. There's no way I could ever look to see if that tablet is there. So what I'm going to do is critique the last 2 of those 4. We can demand one manuscript, and this is what I'm going to demand, and you can demand this as well. All I'm looking for is one manuscript, complete manuscript, from the mid-7th century, that means from 652, which is complete, that means has all 114 books, or all 114 surahs, and has never been changed. Now that's not too much to ask, is it? The reason why I'm asking that and demanding is because they claim it. And you're going to see a little video where that claim is made, and you'll hear every Muslim claim that they can go back to theirs is the only scripture that can be traced right back to its original source on earth. And you'll hear almost every Muslim I've met, and for 40 years of working with Muslims, when I first came here, when I first started coming here to Britain back in 1992, they were claiming, what was it, about 100,000 manuscripts at that time? Remember that, Judy? 100,000 manuscripts that they could point to that came from the time of Uthman. We started confronting these. They then moved back to about 10,000 manuscripts. Then by about 2002, they moved back to 1,000 manuscripts. By 2014, when I did my debate with Shabir Ali there in Toronto on the 6 major manuscripts, they then moved back to those 6 manuscripts. So from 100,000 down to 1,000, down to 6 manuscripts in 2014. Now with this new material that I'm introducing tonight, and you'll see why, they've really now only reduced themselves down to 1 manuscript. The Topkapi. Ooh, I love that. Makes my job. Isn't that been great, Sarah, how we've forced them back. But even that 1 manuscript we're going to put on the hot seat tonight. So this is all I'm going to do tonight. So I'm going to do 12 different areas. Hold on. We're going to go through 12 areas of historical criticism. The first one I'm going to do is I'm going to look at what the Muslim leaders used to say. I'm looking at then what the Muslim scholars now today say. I'm going to look at some historical anachronism. We're going to go into what we call source criticism. We'll look at the first two compilations of the Quran. Then we'll look at the 6 earliest manuscripts. We'll look at the 2 layers of the Sana'a manuscript, the most exciting amongst them. We'll look at the 4 carbon dating lab reports, take a swipe through the late diacritical variants, ask the question about where is that first earliest extant Quran, and then end up with the early consonantal variants and end up with the history of the 1924 Hafs canonized text. 12 areas. Put your pen down. You're not going to keep up with me. That's why we're filming this, so it's going to be on YouTube. It's going to be on KT Online. It's also be on Fander Films, so you can look at it and take your time and unpack it. We're going to take everything that's on the screen will be embedded into the film that we're going to put up online. So let's start with the very first one. What do modern Muslim scholars, what do they claim today? Let's start with Suzanne Hanif, who is a convert to Islam. She says that it is preserved today in its exact original form. Okay, so she's a convert. Maybe she doesn't know better. Well, let's ask Fethullah Gulen. Fethullah Gulen, who is part of the Gulen movement out of Turkey. He lives in Pennsylvania now. He and Erdogan used to be co-scholars together before Erdogan then and he separated. He says one Quran unaltered, unedited, and untampered. Okay? What about Abdullah Yusuf Ali? Abdullah Yusuf Ali is probably the most respected translator of the Quran into the English language, did his translation in the 1930s. He said, not a single letter has changed. This is in 1935 he said this. Not a single letter has changed. So what we have in our hand today, this book right here, is exactly the same that was which was revealed to Muhammad and then compiled by Uthman. Maulvi Muhammad Ali, who is part of the Ahmadi movement, he goes even further. He says, not even a diacritical point has been changed. When you look at the Arabic script, you will see that there are dots above and below the line. We'll explain these. Those are diacritical points. Anytime you see a dot, to make it a nun or a ta or a tha or a ba or a ya, that is, those dots create the letters and separate the letters. Those are called diacritical points. So he's saying even the dots are exactly the same today as they have always been, that exist there in heaven, sent down to Muhammad, and then compiled by Uthman. Dr. Shabir Ali, a good friend of mine, I've debated him 6 different times. He used to say that they were exactly identical for over 1,300 years. He said, folks, that's 1,300 years ago, and we can compare that with what we're reading today, and we find them to be exactly identical. He goes on to say, and then he actually got a little bit more wiser as he went on. He says, the text was known through memory work and through the written materials handed down right from the time of the Prophet Muhammad. As I said, the 2 copies that were made 1,400 years ago. So then he went to 1,400 years, making it even earlier. One which is in Tashkent, Russia. Well, he doesn't know his geography. Tashkent's not in Russia. For example, has been demonstrated by Amand van Deffer in his book Ulum al-Quran to be an early copy from that time, and we find no difference from that copy to what we're reading today. That's the Samarkand manuscript, which is in Tashkent in Uzbekistan, not Russia. We'll look at that today. So, conclusions. These are their conclusions, that the Quran we have today has not changed one iota since its inception 1,400 years ago. 2, that the Quran we have today is exactly the same as that which is on the preserved tablets in heaven. And 3, that our Quran parallels in every detail that which was revealed to the Prophet Muhammad and was written down completely by Uthman in 652 AD. But is that what the earliest Muslim scholars believed? Let's look at what they said concerning the Quran. So I've just given you what the modern Muslim scholars say. Let's see what the earliest one said. Well, here you have Ibn Abi Dawud. He says that some verses were lost. The Quran that was sent down were known by those who died in the day of Yama, but they were not known by those who survived them, nor were they written down, nor were they found with even one person after them. That's not the same as what I'm hearing scholars today say. Here you have As-Suyuti, who's writing, it is reported from Ismail ibn Ibrahim, from Ayyub, and from Nafi, and from Ibn Umar, he says, who said, let none of you say, I have acquired the whole of the Quran. How does he know what all of it is when much of the Quran has disappeared? Rather, let him say, I have acquired what has survived. Now, that's a huge admission right there. Sahih Muslim, second only to Bukhari as far as importance for the hadith writers, said, some of the verses were forgotten. I have, however, forgotten it with the exception of this which I remember, and he then recites what he remembers. So here you have Sahih Bukhari, the most authoritative of the hadith writers, talking about verses which were canceled. We used to read the verse of the Quran revealed in their connection, but later the verse was canceled, he said. Then you have Bukhari going on and saying that something was missing. This is the verse of Rajam. This is the verse on stoning adulterers. Among what Allah revealed was the verse on Rajam, and we did recite this verse and understand and memorize it, and Allah's apostle did carry out the punishment of stoning, and so did we after him. I'm afraid that after a long time has passed, somebody will say, by Allah, we do not find the verse of Rajam in Allah's book, and that's true. To open up to chapter 24, verse 2, and you will not find stoning there. It's now 100 lashes. 100 lashes. Ibn Abi Dawud talks about some verses overlooked. Muwatta Ibn Malik talks about some verses having been changed. By the way, that was interesting because it was changed by a woman, not by a man, but by a woman. Some verses were modified. Al-Hajjaj, Ibn Yusuf, made 11 modifications. This is the same Al-Hajjaj that we talked about last night, who then created those qiblas in between. Remember, all the mosques that he was forming all had a qibla that was not to Petra, not to Mecca, but exactly in between. That's the same Al-Hajjaj, who made 11 modifications to the Quran. Some verses were substituted according to Sahih Bukhari, and some verses were eaten by sheep. The verse of stoning and of breastfeeding an adult 10 times was revealed, and the paper was with me, was put under my pillow, but when the messenger of Allah died, we were preoccupied with his death, and a tame sheep came and ate it. So, what do we see here? Lost, disappeared, forgotten. canceled, missing, overlooked, changed, modified, substituted, eaten by sheep. Does this sound like a book which was compiled perfectly and completely? Does this not imply intentional human intervention right through its initial compilation? So there's a disconnect between that which the earliest scholars are saying and what the scholars today are saying.
Well, as you can see, this is something that we're not bringing up today in the discussion on the Qur'an. We haven't really brought up these difficulties. We've not really got into this area, yet you need to know about this. When you look at the claims that Muslims make about their Quran, that it is eternal, that it was sent down, that it was complete, and that it is unchanged, those 4 words. When you look and see what they're saying, it's obvious. Well, we can't really say too much about the first 2, because the first 2, uncreated, eternal, how do you answer that? That's just a claim that goes nowhere and cannot be supported by Muslims either. It's just what the Quran says in chapter 85, verse 22. As far as was it sent down, who knows? It's only traditions from way in the 9th and 10th century that tell us it was sent down. That's Al-Bukhari that tells us, and he died in 870. We don't have anything from the 7th century to know whether it was sent down. We have no manuscript from the 7th century to see. We have nothing from the time of Muhammad. We have nothing from Abu Bakr. We have nothing from Umar, nothing from Uthman, and especially nothing from Uthman, and that's what we should have. So we don't have any idea whether it was sent down. Unchanged, complete, those 2 areas we can really look at. And so that's one reason why we're going to spend much of our time looking at those 2 areas, the last 2 of the 4. And by doing that, you can see we went through, and what I said is I talked about what modern Muslim scholars, they've elevated the Quran so high. They put it so high. Remember, the higher you put it, the farther easier it's going to fall. I remember we had this dictum when I was back there at Speaker's Corner for 25 years. We always only ever used ladders that had 2 rungs, possibly 3 at the most. You never went beyond that, because if you have more rungs, that means you're higher up. When they throw you off, you fall farther and you get hurt more. You get hurt a lot more because you have further to fall. And that's what modern Muslim scholars have done. Unfortunately, those ones that I went through, just look at their names. These are all well-known scholars. They should not have said that every letter, every word, every sentence, even some of them were saying every dot is exactly the same. Don't say that, because when you say that, you put the Quran so high, you elevate it so high, full of superlatives, that all we need to do is look at 1 dot that is different, 1 vowel that is different, 1 word that is different. And that's why the Yasar Qadis and the Shabiradis are having a real dilemma, because they realize that if you're going to make this kind of claim, if you're going to put it that high up, if you're going to make that enormous comments like that, folks, be careful. Because the higher you put your Quran, the easier it's going to fall, and the farther it's going to fall, and the easier it makes it for us to find just 1 word that's different. That's all we need to find, is 1 word that is different. And therefore, if you can find 1 word that is different in this Quran from any of the earlier Qurans, that means God has not preserved it. Allah is weak, is inept, is incapable of fulfilling the very promise that he gave there in chapter 10, verse 15, in chapter 15, verse 9, and in chapter 18, verse 27. If Allah can really preserve his word, then how come even 1 word, if we can find 1 word that is different, we're going to find lots of words that are different. Can you see then the dilemma for Shabiradi, who then there on May 9 says, don't worry. Yes, you're going to find lots of differences. Yes, I understand. But they don't change any doctrine. So now he's moved back a whole nother degree. They don't change any doctrine or belief or practice. That's not what the Quran says. It doesn't talk about belief, practice, or doctrine. It doesn't say anything about doctrine, belief, or practice. That's what Shabit Ali has added to it, because he is taking what we say. That's what we say about the Bible. But we know the Bible is written by man. We never make that claim. Have you noticed? We've never put the Bible up on a pedestal like you Muslims have. So therefore, it's not going to fall. It doesn't fall. And when you see a difference between what a manuscript says in the 4th century and something that has been added, a word or something has been added later on, we know that that's normal. That happens with all ancient documents and all ancient artifacts and all ancient manuscripts, including the Quran. Including the Quran. We're not going to get to that yet. Wait till you find how many thousands of differences that we're going to find. And these are shocking when you see them. Muslims, can you then understand why Shabir Ali and Yasir Qadhi are in a dilemma? Because they live in the West. They are having to answer the questions we're going. They're not able to just stick at that red line. See, you Muslims in the traditional world, you who are supported by people like Muhammad Hijab and Rashid, you, the ones who are supported by that, you have to hold it to that. You can't go beyond that because you made that claim. You put your Quran on such a high pedestal that you don't go beyond that red line. You know what? This is a common symbol here in America. Footballers call this timeout. You've got to take time out. Because can you see what we're doing? We're going way beyond your line. And these are the questions you're going to have to answer. So that if you make these claims, support it, prove it, source it. That's all we ask. Because what we're going to show you, as we move on now, is that your Quran, it does not come from God. It doesn't even come from Muhammad. It doesn't even come from Uthman. And yes, it has been changed all the way through from centuries to century to century. And even the Quran that we finally have today in the 21st century, it's not the Quran that they had way back then in the 7th century, if they even had a Quran in the 7th century. God bless you. This is Jay. Over and out.